So another improvised patch tutorial. Today we start with the Surge XT collection with the FM2 VCO. Again, trying to build the patch from scratch while concentrating on one module. Again, today we have the FM2. If there is a VCV module I didn't make a video about and you want me to go back and explore, please let me know. But again, today we start with the Surge XT. There are many modules, lots of lovely things to experiment with. And again, we have today the FM2 VCO. Now, the FM2 is basically a 3 operator. Maybe later I will explain why I do this. 3 operator FM voice. It's great for all sorts of different melodic, harmonic, beautiful sounds. What we have basically, again, we have 3 operators. So, for example, we have here, let's say 1, 2, and 3. Right? We have carrier. This will be the oscillator, sine wave, the oscillator we will listen to. And then we have 2 modulators, 2 operators, 2 oscillators basically that will modulate the frequency of the carrier, right? So we have modulator 1 and we have modulator 2, right? You can see this, you can see this also here, and of course I deleted this, right? It's written everything also on the module, right? So we have modulator 1 and modulator 2, right? And they will modulate the frequency of the carrier. And again, the carrier is the oscillator, the operator we listen to. So if I send this, for example, to the output, right, you can see or you can hear, we get basically a sine wave. You can see this here also, right? But now we have here, if I zoom in a bit, we have modulator 1 and modulator 2. And the nice thing about the FM2 is that we can set the frequencies, the pitch basically of both modulators in integers, right? So 1, 2, 3, and so on. Basically the ratio between the modulator and the carrier. So for example, here we have modulator 1 ratio 1. Basically it will be the same frequency, the same pitch as what we listen to now, right? Maybe I will make this a bit louder, right? If I start bringing the modulation up, right, you can hear the result and also see what's happening on this little scope here. Really, Surge XT is just perfect. But again, we can change the ratio also, for example, 2 to 1, and again, it will jump in integers, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. These are not octaves. When you set it to 3, for example, it's not 3 octaves above. This is basically 3 times the basic frequency, so an octave and a half, more or less. Right, so if I set this to 2, right, we get a different result, and then so on and so forth, and it goes up to 32, I believe, yes, up to 32, and we have 2 of them, so we have modulator 1 and we have modulator 2, each of them, right, with a ratio control, right, so we have basically a sort of FM voice that we can explore and experiment with. We have other things here on the panel that we will see in a second. But let's start with a nice sequence. I used the Venom stereo mixer in the last videos and it worked pretty well. So I will use it again. Basically, it's a stereo mixer, right? So we can mix a few different voices. I like having the volume here at -12 more or less, just so I'm not clipping. Let's see if we need to add a bit more volume. But let's start with a nice sequence. I will use maybe the new sequencer from Sequoia. There's a step sequencer, right, that I can use. And let's use also what kind of clock module. I'm just trying to explore a bit more collection. Let's just go with an LFO as my clock. Right, so I will just send this to the clock. The LFO will go to the clock input. Right, we have by default 16 steps. And this I can use, and I will quantize things also. Again, also with the Sequoia quantizer, why not? I will quantize this sequence. This will go to the volt per octave input. Basically quantizing, we did a video about the quantizer not long ago. Basically, it will correct the voltage into a musical scale, just so it sounds a bit more harmonious. And life is not worth living without reverb. So I will just use Galaxy. By the way, the FM2 VCO, and I believe there is another or 2 more even VCOs from Surge XT that are so-called, not so-called, but they look like they are stereo. There is a left and right, but in this case, there is nothing stereo about it. It's just, I believe, because the design of the other modules, the other oscillators, and everything in Surge XT is basically stereo. So I believe this is why also here we'll have left and right, but there is nothing stereo about this oscillator. You don't have to use the right output at all. And unless I'm missing something, so please correct me, but I believe that there is nothing stereo about this, right? So now we have some reverb, we just have a drone, and now I can start, maybe, you know what, maybe I will go, let's go with 5 steps. Right, so we have a 5-step sequence, and again, right, we can start adding some movement here, and it's all very beautiful with this FM2 VCO. It's all very harmonious and musical. Right, and of course we can maybe add a bit movement here. So let's say, for example, there is also a trigger sequencer from Sequocell, also relatively new. And you know what, maybe instead of the LFO, let's make this a bit more organized. Maybe use like a clock module, a dedicated clock module, just to make this a bit more easier. A dedicated clock module to have also divisions and multiplications, and also reset, so we can drive different modules with different clocks. So for example, here I will use, I don't know, let's go with 113 BPM, I don't know why, and maybe multiply it by 2. Right, and then we have also a reset here that I can use just to reset everything, so everything runs together. I don't know if it's just such a good idea, but let's try and see what happens. Right, so now let's say, for example, the trigger sequencer will have, let's say, 7 steps, right? And now they will start together, but they will start drifting because one has 5, one has 7. And then what we can do is we can use an envelope, for example, right, with the trigger sequencer. The trigger sequencer will trigger the envelope, and this envelope will introduce FM, right? So let's see. With the Surge XT, let me disconnect this for a second because I want to show you the modulation matrix. With the Surge XT modules, in all of them, we have this modulation matrix that basically allows you to map modulation to any control. So you connect your modulation source, in this case an envelope, and then you click this button, and now you can map it to anything, on almost anything here on the panel, right? So in this case, you can see I want to modulate the FM amount, so I just drag this and we have this blue line, and then I can disconnect it, and now this mapping, this envelope is mapped to the FM amount, right? So if I have, for example, something like this, oh, I like this, but there is not enough volume here. Right, so now we have 2 different sequences, one with 5 steps that is controlling pitch, one with 7 steps that is bringing in sort of brightness, making this a bit more percussive. Right, and then maybe we can change the ratio here, maybe 2 to 1. No, actually the 1 to 1 was nice, but maybe with the second modulator we can have, right, an LFO maybe opening and closing it. Right, so let's use an LFO. Maybe I will use, I know there is also the quad LFO from Surge XT, but I will use just a small LFO. This is called the LLFO from Bog Audio. Again, just a small 3 HP sine wave LFO in this case. So I'm going to send this to another modulation input. Right, and again, in this case, we have to map it. So let's start, let's say the starting point of the modulation will be somewhere here. And then I can start modulating, right, map the modulation. You can see the movement here. right? So we have also something like this. And actually, instead of the sine, let's continue with Cell. There is a module called Mod 7, which we have basically 7 LFOs. We can change the frequency of each of them, right? So we have 7 LFOs we can use. So I'm going to use one of them again to the modulation input, and I can change the rate here, make it a bit slower. Because now what I want to do, I want to add panning modulation. And panning modulation we can do with the fade module from VCV. Right, the FM2 will go to input 1, and then we have output 1 and output 2, which will basically be left and right. And then with the X fade I can pan left. If you're with headphones you can hear it, and right. Right, so we can add panning with another of the LFOs here. Maybe not fully, and maybe a bit quicker. Right, and of course we can also modulate the ratio, for example. But I don't like it. I would like to leave it for now at 2. But we can explore the other parameters here. So for example, we have feedback. If I mute this for a second, we have a feedback control. And the feedback control, if you remember from before, we have 2 modulators, right? Modulator 1, modulator 2, and carrier, right? They modulate the carrier, but there is also feedback where the carrier will feed back into itself and will modulate itself, and this creates even more texture and at high settings, even noise. Right, so let's see how this will sound like. Right, you can see it changes the waveform completely. It's not a sine wave anymore. And there are 2 more modes here. So there is the vintage mode, which will just make it a bit smoother, I guess. Let's turn it on and off and see what it sounds like. Right, it's just a bit... It's very subtle, but it's there. And there is also the extended feedback. So, for example, if here we go all the way up, it's at this level, the extended will take it much higher and we'll start getting noise. So all you have to do is enable it. Right, which can also be interesting for percussive voices, for example. Right, so also the feedback we can modulate. Right, so let's again use another LFO, make it a bit slower. And again, I just click the button and then I can map the feedback. And you can see the movement. Now, another thing we can do is we can mix. I want to add a bit more variation to this sequence. So what we can do, I'm going to use another step sequencer. If I hold Control and Shift, I can just grab another cable for the clock and for the reset. In this case, let's leave this at 16 steps, maybe just initialize the 5 steps here. Right. And now what I can do, I can do this directly from this quantizer. You know, let's do this with the quantizer, why not? So this quantizer has an offset input, which I can basically transpose the pitch up and down. So if I send this second sequence to the offset input, and let's have, for example, step 1 a bit up, right, maybe a bit less up. Right, we have some variation, and maybe step 1, maybe step, I don't know, 10? Right, so already we have some movement. Now another thing I would like to do is I would like to, when I stop everything, because maybe I would like to gate this sequence a bit, soon we will go back to the FM2, sorry. Just to add a bit more space here, I don't want this always to run. So what we can do is we can send this FM2 VCO first through a VCA, because I would like to control the amplitude, right? And then use an envelope to control the amplitude for me, right? And now what I can do, Now what I can do, let's do something like this. I can use even another step sequencer, but in this case, let's go with, I don't know, let's say a divided clock, divided by 4 clock. And again, use the reset and just reset everything. Right, and here let's have just 4 steps, right? So we have again 5, 16, and now we have 4. And let's say that step 1 will be on and step 2 will be on. And step 1 and 2 will be basically the ones that will open the VCA with the envelope. So they will gate the envelope. We spoke about this last time, I believe. Just because it says here gate doesn't mean that you have to use a dedicated gate signal. This is all just voltage. And voltage is voltage is voltage. And basically a gate means that whenever it goes above a certain level, it's considered a gate. So if I use a sequencer, a CV sequencer so-called, although gates are also CV, this should also gate the envelope. Right, something like this, but maybe, you know what, maybe this is a bit slower. Maybe this is a bit too slow, so let's see. I mean, there are other ways of doing this, but I'm just trying to think, you know, maybe instead of divided by 4, let's go with divided by 2. Right, and now here we have to change the envelope because we get this tail in the sound, no need for almost no release, almost no attack. Or maybe a bit more attack actually, so it's fading in. And you know what, maybe it should also fade out. Right, and now what we can do, we can add a delay. Surge XT also has also a lovely delay that we can even sync. But you know what, let's not sync it. I'm always syncing the delay. Today I will do something different. I will not explain too much about this delay. We'll have a dedicated video, hopefully, about this. But basically, we have delay times, which is quite okay, and the depth is basically the feedback. We have also internal modulation here for detuning things. Right, and maybe with a delay, a divided by 4 will go much better. Again, this is more or less improvised. I'm sorry that it's I'm changing my mind all the time, but this is the whole point here. Right, so now we have a nice sequence. Again, the FM2 is just beautiful, really. You can get all sorts of different harmonic and melodic sounds here. But we have 2 more aspects here that we didn't speak about. So let's try and create another voice here. I will just mute this one for a second, right? And if I connect another FM2, right, again, we have the carrier, the sine wave. And by the way, you know what? Let's go for a second through why I made like this before when I said it's operators. So there is a thing that's called an FM operator. There's even a module that is basically an FM operator. And an FM operator has a few things. First of all, it's an oscillator. It will generate oscillations. Most commonly a sine wave, just like here. But an operator has a few more things. So first of all, an operator can be tuned by ratios. So here on the FM operator, you can see it says frequency ratio, unlike a normal VCO that you tune by frequency, for example, or by pitch. In this case, you don't tune it by frequency or pitch, you tune it by ratios, 1 to 1, 2 to 1, and so on. So here we also have the same, right? We tune the operators by ratios. Another thing is that we have feedback, right? In this case, we have feedback. I believe this is just for the carrier. So we have feedback for the carrier also on the FM operator. But another thing an FM operator has, and it has nothing to do with this module, it's just that this module is basically an FM operator. But another thing that you will find on FM synthesizers for each operator basically is a dedicated envelope, right? So here on the FM operator we have it, but here we don't have envelopes. So it's not really a fully operator. Maybe it's just a I'm just exaggerating a bit, but it's not a fully operator because it has no envelopes. There's another module, the Dexter synthesizer from Valley, which is an FM synthesizer, but again, it's a bit, it's not a bit, but again, the operators here, you can see it says operator 1, 2, and 3. So here you have also ratios, right? You can, basically the multiplier is the ratio by half, by quarter, and so on, by 2 and stuff like this. But also here we don't have dedicated envelopes. And also I believe here you can create feedback in some sort of way. I mean, there is a global feedback. But they don't have dedicated envelope. That's what I did like this when I said operators, because they are not fully operators, but never mind, it still works really nicely, and you can see you can add just envelopes externally. So now let's have a look. I'm sorry, this was a bit a tangent. Okay, I went on a tangent. So anyway, FM2, let's go back to the FM2 VCO. We have three more things actually that we didn't speak about. The phase and the offset. So if I add a bit of FM, right, the phase will basically change the phase, of the modulators, basically of both modulators. So if I start, if there is no modulation, right, you basically get sort of a detuning, but if you add modulation, you can really see this. Right, it will change the phase here and will introduce another level of complexity to changing the sound. And there is also offset. So if, like before I showed you, we can tune the modulators by ratios, right? And it will stay as perfect integers, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. But what if you want to start detuning things? You have the offset. This will detune the modulators, not by a lot, but it can introduce movement. Right, so this is also something nice, maybe for a nice chord. Right, this can be really interesting for a nice chord. Maybe this is what we will do now, but there's another thing I want to show you. In the right-click menu, there are many options, not many, but a few options that can really help you. One of them I really love, and it's almost on all, I say almost because I didn't check it, can be that it's on all VCOs, I believe it is actually. Which is the oscillator drift. So there is character you can change, natural, warm, or bright. There is output level, I have it by default on 70%. And there is oscillator drift that will always add movement to the pitch, right? The pitch will not stay. For example, if I add a tuner, there is a tuner module called Hot Tuner from Nischi. So there is a tuner. If I send a sine wave from the VCV VCO, you can see it's basically static. 261.63 Hertz. If I add a tuner to the FM2 VCO, you can see that you will see, right? You can see it's always moving. There is always movement there. It's never static. And this is adding a lot of character and a lot of warmness, I guess, or humanness or organicness. To the VCO, basically, you can see it's always moving, and I have it by default on 15%. You can experiment if you take it more. You can even hear the movement. I have it not usually, but by default on 15%. Maybe you knew this already, maybe not. If you go to preset here, you can save a default preset, so every time you load the module, it will load with the same settings. So this is why I have this by default on 15% and 70%. And yeah, so two more things that can really help you with the sound. So let's try and create a chord now. And let me see how we can do this as easily as possible. Shall we do this the modular way? No, let's not overwhelm things. And let's just use a dedicated module. There is the chord key module from Impromptu. Right, that allows us to create up to 4 note chords, and we can use, let me disconnect this for a second, and we can use polyphony. I'm really using other modules in this video. I like it. Let me know if it's okay, or shall I stick with mostly VCV or also mostly Surge XT. I don't know. I think it's pretty okay because I'm not using the full capabilities of all the other modules. I'm just showing you what I can do quickly. But let's use the chord key. So we can use polyphony. Basically, polyphony will allow us to send multiple signals through one cable. Right, so if I send the upper cable here, the upper output or the volt per octave input, you can see it's a thicker cable. And if I hover above it, you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4 channels of polyphony that will allow us, this will create a chord basically. And here I can change the notes of the chord. Maybe we'll do this in a second. And another thing I like to do with polyphony is to spread the voices left and right in the stereo field. So instead of having all 4 voices in this case in the center, I like to have 2 on the left and 2 on the right, or something in between. There are many modules that can help you with this, and I like using the bass module from MindMeld, or the Bass Master Junior it's called, because it has an option in the right-click menu, sum to stereo. It will sum the polyphonic cable into stereo, which means that it will basically spread it left and right. So you see we have again a thicker cable, and then if I send this left and right to the output, we get in stereo, we get a 4-note chord. Right, also here I would like to have some reverb, and let's go with the reverb from Surge XT, why not? I mean, we are using Surge XT, so let's do this. And let's go with a preset, I don't know, let's go with Wormhole. No. Oh yeah. Right? Oh, this is very, very feedbacky. Let's go with something else. Alrighty then. Alrighty then. Okay, so now we have a chord, and also here we can start adding some movement. And again, we spoke about the phase. Right, so we can add FM, let's say, with a different ratio. And then add maybe quick modulation. Again, we have here the LFOs, so I can just use this. Again, map the phase in this case, and make this LFO a bit quicker. Right, something like this. Add some offset, so now the oscillators are, or the modulators are also detuned. Maybe this is a bit too quick, a bit too predictable. We can also add modulation to the offset, right? So it's a bit more detuned, less detuned, and so on. This is nice. Right, so we have also a chord drone. Maybe also modulation for the feedback, so why not? Maybe the vintage one, so it's a bit smoother. Something like this. Let's bring in the first voice. Different, shorter delay time maybe. More feedback. Right, so we have a nice chord drone. And let's try and create a bass quickly with another FM2. Right, and let's do this. I will use again a VCA and envelope. Again, there is nothing stereo about the FM2, so you don't need to use a stereo VCA or something like this. And this will go quickly here to the mixer. Right, so FM2 through a VCA, the envelope controls the VCA, controls the amplitude over time. And I will use another trigger sequencer from Sequencel. And let's go in this case with the clock multiplied by 4. And again, use the reset just so everything is nice. And not in sync necessarily, but just so we get repetitive results whenever we open the patch, for example. Right, and now in the right-click menu of the trigger sequencer, I can choose to have a trigger, which will be a short trigger, or a gate, or the clock input, the clock that we are using. So I will go with the clock width, because then I can use the envelope also with decay and a bit attack or whatever. I can have more controls other than just release. I hope it makes sense. This will gate the envelope, and let's go with something like this. Right, and here we have dedicated octave control. Maybe I will add some FM. I just click and drag it, and I can shift the octaves and take it down. Right, and we have something like this. Right, and of course also here we can add an envelope. So if I add another envelope, if I hold Control and Shift and then click D, it will duplicate the module with the cables already connected. So let's see what it will do with the envelope. Right, we have the gate and the envelope is already connected to the VCA. I don't want it to go to the VCA, I want it to go to the FM2. Right, to control, to modulate the modulator 1 amount. And this should be a bit shorter, just to add another plug to the sound. Right, something like this. A bit feedback. Right, again, the FM2 is just amazing because you can get really nice musical, harmonic, beautiful results with it. Really quickly, really easily. Let's see. Let's add also sorts of accents. Right, maybe with something like this. Let's say, again, Control Shift D will duplicate with the cables connected. Right, I don't need the output in this case, and I just have to reset things. Right, but now I can add also accents. So for example, let's say the first step will be accented, and then let's say also step number 6, step number 9, and maybe that's it. Let's say just 3 of them, another envelope. Right, so this will gate another envelope, and this envelope will control the amount of the second modulator. Again, very short. Right? So we have a nice bass. Right, maybe I will add also a delay to this bass, but maybe another thing we can do with the FM2, with the chords, is maybe we can introduce some movement in the notes, so it's not just a drone, right? So in this case, with the chord key, we can have different chords saved, and then switch between them basically like a sequencer. So if I right-click it, I can copy the chord, right, and go to the second slot, and then paste it, right, and then make, for example, I can take one note an octave up, right, and then again, go to another one, paste it, and then maybe choose a different note, something like this, right, so we have 3. Right, and actually, we can do this also randomly. So let's use the random module from... not randomly, maybe with an LFO. Let's do this with another LFO. We have another LFO here from the... Yeah, we have a last LFO here. I will send it through a VCA, not because it's a VCA, but just because I can attenuate it. I can use the VCA to attenuate the LFO, so it's not going all the way up and down. Because this LFO is bipolar, it will go up and down from the 0 point, so I can set the 0 point to be 2, and then it will go to 1 and to 3. Right, I hope it makes sense. This will go to the VCA and to this index input, basically switching between the chords, and now I can start opening it. Right, we have 1, we have 3. Right, and I can do this slowly. And we have some movement. I'm sorry, I have to have everything organized always. Right, and now we can add a delay to the bass here. Right, in this case I will sync it just so we get a bit more rhythmic out of it. Right, maybe we need a bit more level. And just for fun, let's add also a hi-hat or some sort of noise, because we saw with the feedback we can create noise also. So let's try and create something like this. I will use another trigger sequencer from Sequencel. In this case, again, with the multiplied by 4, again, reset things. Where is it? Reset things. Right, and in this case, again, we need a VCA to control the amplitude and envelope. Again, we don't have stereo here, but maybe we can add panning modulation. So I will already add fade module from VCV, just like we've seen before. 1 input and then 2 outputs, left and right. Right, and now we will use the gate sequencer to gate the envelope. In this case, it should be very short, so I don't mind using triggers, because then I just have the release to deal with. And let's do something like this, maybe offbeat. And again, we need to extend the feedback range. And you know what, maybe instead of 16 steps, let's go with 15 steps. No, not 15, I don't want to be with the 5, so not 5, not 5, not 10, not 15, let's go with 12. Something like this. Right, and just so we can listen to this, of course, the octave you can take up. Right, and add lots of FM. Right, and to add movement to this, we don't have any LFO left, so I will just use another LFO. Again, it's a small LFO, sine LFO in this case from Bog Audio, just for having panning modulation. And I will use another step sequencer from Sequencel that will run with the same clock, again multiplied by 4. And we will use a reset, and this will control the release of the envelope, right? And this has 16 steps. so it will not sit together with the 12 steps, so we always have some movement. Right, so again, so many things you can create with the FM2 VCO. It really is a beautiful, beautiful module, a beautiful oscillator you can experiment with. It's great for chords, great for melodic, great for basses, great for noise. You can do all sorts of different things with it. Of course, this was just scratching the surface. But that was it for today. Again, let me know if there's a VCV module you would like me to go back and explore. If you have any idea what other modules from Surge XT you would like to see next, let me also know. But that was it for today. Thank you again so much for watching. Cheers!